Good evening. I'm Renee Powell with Oklahoma Family Network, and welcome to Toolbox Tuesday. Tonight, we are very fortunate to have Erin Shepard from the ARC of Oklahoma here to discuss the ARC at School Educational Advocacy Program. Erin Shepard is the Training and Outreach Coordinator for the ARC of Oklahoma. She's an experienced educator with a demonstrated history of working in educational and education-adjacent advocacy. She is skilled in American Sign Language, special education, bilingualism, teaching, and curriculum development. She has a bachelor's degree focused in deaf education from the University of Tulsa and a master's of education in reading from Northeastern State University. She's also a doctoral candidate at Southern Nazarene University. She's passionate about inclusive communication for caregivers and in public health systems, with 10 years of experience in deaf and special education. She is also the parent of two children with neurodivergence. You might not know this, but she's an accomplished triathlete who happens to be deaf and hard of hearing. And thank you so much for being with us, Erin. I am going to mute myself and I am going to let you please enlighten us.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you guys so much for being here, giving up your Tuesday evening to come and learn with us. As Renee said, my name is Erin Shepard. I am the Training and Outreach Coordinator for the ARC of Oklahoma. And if you're not familiar with the ARC of Oklahoma, we're going to talk a little bit about what we do and how we came about here in just a moment. But what I want to talk to you guys tonight about is empowering families through advocacy. And really, what does advocacy look like? What should it look like? And answer any questions about how families and caregivers can appropriately advocate for the needs of their students in the public school system, especially when it comes to things like special education. We know that there's a lot that is going on the federal level right now. There's a lot of uncertainty and different things. So one of the ways that we ensure that we are getting the services that we need for our kids is through appropriate advocacy. But there's a lot that actually goes into what that is. A lot of people think, well, advocacy, oh, that just means I'm going and telling the schools what I want and what I need, and they're going to do it. And that is advocating for my student. Not necessarily. That's not necessarily what advocacy is. So that's a bit what we're going to talk about tonight, what those gaps are in communication, what advocacy actually looks like, what it is, and how you can use it to strengthen your relationships with the public schools specifically. Renee already introduced me, so I don't have to spend a whole lot of time on here. Thank you guys for letting me join you guys tonight. So the first thing I kind of want to talk about is language use. Okay, language use is really, really important when we're talking about students with disabilities and adults with disabilities in any sphere, whether that's public school education, whether that is through self-advocacy as adults, or even in the medical sphere. Using appropriate language when we're talking with and about people with disabilities is really, really important. It's also really important when we're talking about the family itself, right? And when we're talking about caregivers, okay? The first thing I want to point out about talking about family and caregivers is that you will very rarely hear me say mom or dad. Very rarely. I tend to use the term family or caregiver. And the reason why I do that is because families and caregivers look different all over the place, okay? Even in the school systems. So a lot of times we default to saying, well, the mom or the dad or the parents, but it isn't always parents and it isn't always moms and it isn't always dads. Sometimes it could be grandparents. Sometimes it could be a foster parent. Sometimes it can be a family friend that is doing the advocacy work. Okay, so that's the first thing I really want us to be mindful of tonight, that we're not going to use the term mom, dad, or parent, even if that is your role. Even if that's your role, that's fine. For the purposes of this, we're going to use the word family and caregiver. And the next thing I want to talk about is people first versus identity first language. Okay. We know that people first language is generally preferred among the disability community. Okay. And especially when you are a professional or a neurotypical talking with or alongside people with disabilities, right? We will use people first language, such as a person with autism, a person with Down syndrome, a child with a disability. Okay. However, There are instances and there are communities that prefer to use identity first language. The first community would be the deaf and hard of hearing community. I myself identify as a deaf or hard of hearing woman. That's how I identify. The reason being is because I do have hearing loss. I have deep, severe to profound hearing loss, for which I am both fluent in American Sign Language and I utilize hearing aids to use spoken language. Because of that, it affects every aspect of my life. It affects how I communicate. It affects how I work. It affects how I live. It affects how I have relationships with other people. So therefore, because it affects every single part of me, I identify as that. Another community that is really taking to identity first language is the autistic community. Many autistic adults prefer to be known as autistic. Again, the reason being is because it affects every single aspect of their life. It affects how they learn, it affects how they communicate, it affects how they live, it affects everything from the moment they wake up to the moment they go to sleep. All right, so even sometimes affecting sleep, right? If we know about autism and developmental disabilities. So, for the purposes of this, you're going to hear me possibly use a mix of people first and identity first language. It's all up to personal preference. As a special education teacher, what I've always recommended is two things. Number one, if you're working with a family or caregiver, ask the family or caregiver what that family, caregiver, or student prefers to be identified as. Number two, if you're working with adults, we ask the adult what they prefer. Do you prefer person first language or do you prefer identity first language? And if they're not sure, or this is an unknown, or this is a new concept, it's always okay to default to people first language. Okay. But again, to be as inclusive as humanly possible, I always give this disclaimer about language use and how I utilize language when I train. And again, if you have any questions or comments or anything, just you can throw them in the chat, or Renee, they could just speak out if they've got questions, or I will have time for questions at the end as well. So who are we? If you're not familiar with the Arc of Oklahoma, just a little bit of a brief overview of who we are. The Arc of Oklahoma is actually a state chapter of a nationwide organization called the Arc of the U.S. The Arc of the U.S. is the world's largest nonprofit organization that works for and with people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So as a state chapter, we support the mission and vision of the Arc of the U.S., bringing that mission and vision here to Oklahoma to promote and protect the human rights of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities through the lifetime. So here at the Arc of Oklahoma, all of our programs are lifespan programs. So from the moment a child is born or there is a diagnosis given, we offer parental support, resource, referral, assistance with applications, anything like that. In the school system, as students with disabilities are entering schools, we help assist with 504 plans, IEP plans, appropriate advocacy, communication building skills. Again, resource and referral as well. In adulthood, we offer social groups and social clubs, educational groups for adults with disabilities, as well as we have the OKA monitoring program, where we do quality of life monitoring for adults with disabilities that are living, say, in intermediate care facilities or in group homes. And then we are also launching futures planning, where we will be talking to older caregivers of adults, older adults with disabilities, to talk about what future planning looks like, and offering resource and referral for different things like guardianship. So that is a bit about who we are at the Arc of Oklahoma. We are based in Tulsa, but we do serve the entire state, serving across the lifespan. So before I get really into diving into what advocacy looks like, there's a lot of, sometimes we get questions over really what is a developmental disability, right? We hear intellectual and developmental disability, but we don't always know what that means unless you come from that sort of disability background. So the definition of a developmental disability is a set of conditions that occur in early childhood and affect the mental and physical growth of a person, that affects their ability to learn, to communicate, and perform daily tasks. Now, there are some developmental disabilities that can occur and be considered a developmental disability if it occurs before the age of 22, before full development of the brain. An example of that would be a TBI. So if a teenager was involved in a car crash and had a traumatic brain injury as a result, and that affected their continued development into adulthood, that would be considered a developmental disability as well. Some examples of these, this is not an exhaustive list, this is just a basic list of developmental disabilities, is autism spectrum disorder, cerebral palsy, Down syndrome, fetal alcohol spectrum disorders, attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder, and intellectual disabilities as well. So any of those sorts of disabilities, that is the primary group that we serve at the Arc of Oklahoma. Other things that we do is we do a lot of public policy and advocacy. You see some of my teammates here. There are 8 of us. There's only 8 of us at the Arc of Oklahoma, serving the entire state. We have several departments, including public policy and advocacy. We do a lot of work up at the Capitol. We also do some work with the Arc of the US. Myself and our development manager, Tanya Giss, will be traveling to North Carolina tomorrow for the Arc of the US National Convention, so that we can learn more about how to advocate appropriately here in our great state. We also have self-advocacy programs as well, our development and growth programs, and also our family support program through Sherilyn Walton, who runs our parent support groups as well. So the biggest program that we run, though, our most popular, the #1 calls that we get is special education advocacy. Absolutely. That is the #1 program that we have here at the Arc of Oklahoma. And it has been the longest running program at the Arc of Oklahoma. The Arc has actually been around since 1952 here in our state. And it was originally built by a group of parents who, at the time in 1952, students with disabilities did not have the right to go to public school and to have an equal education as all of their typical peers. Okay, so the Arc of Oklahoma, it was under a different name. It's been under many iterations. You may have heard it called TARC, TARC, previously, prior to 2020. So under all of these different names, we've actually been around since 1952, doing this really important work of special education advocacy, and ensuring that students have a free and appropriate public education. But a lot of people are like, again, what even is advocacy? I go in, I tell the school what I want, what I'm going to get, and it happens, and I do it, and that is that. Again, not necessarily true. What is special education advocacy? It's supporting positive, respectful communication alongside the caregiver. Okay. It is not going in and slamming your fist on the table and saying, you're going to do this for this caregiver. No, it is being respectful and positive alongside that caregiver and listening to exactly what it is that they want and what they need. It's supporting the caregiver and the school in finding out of the box solutions. It is supporting them in saying, I hear that you feel that this is something that you cannot provide. However, this is the need that is being shown. How can we solve this together? How can we solve that together? It's asking questions about what the least restrictive environment looks like and what a free and appropriate public education looks like, especially when it comes to behaviors. Okay, that is the #1 phone call that we are getting right now is inappropriate or disruptive behaviors in the public school due to disabilities, right? And even students that are exhibiting behaviors that are unwanted, they still have the right to a least restrictive environment. They still have the right to a free and appropriate public education. So we ask questions about what does that look like in this district. It's supporting the early stages of dispute resolution alongside our Special Education Resolution Center in the state. It's supporting appropriate communication and inclusive communication, which I'll talk about in a moment. We do this in a couple of different ways. First, it's a two-prong approach, really, that we offer here. First, we have direct support, one-on-one advocacy. Absolutely. If a parent was to call our offices or email myself or Sherilyn Walton, then yeah, we can come to an IEP meeting and support that caregiver, and find out exactly what it is that they need. If they're calling us and saying, I have an IEP meeting scheduled for next week and I don't know what I'm doing, that caregiver is clearly in a crisis and needs that direct one-on-one assistance right then. The other way we do it is through what we're doing right now, through appropriate training, right? The more that you know about special education advocacy and how the public education system works, then the better that you can do to empower you as a caregiver to be that advocate for your student. So, how do we advocate? Okay, what do we do? The first thing we have to talk about when we go into advocacy is communication. 99% of the calls that we get and 99% of the disputes that happen at the schools can be resolved through better communication. Hands down. Can be resolved through better communication. 9 times out of 10, the issue really is we just did not communicate our wants and needs, or we did not communicate appropriately so that this caregiver understood what we were saying. So we need to really adopt the idea of inclusive communication when it comes to public school systems and families. So really, what is inclusion? Inclusion is the practice or policy of providing equal access to opportunities and resources for people who might otherwise be excluded or marginalized. That is bolded in blue for a reason, and I'll explain why. Such as those who have physical or intellectual disabilities and members of other minority groups. Communication is the imparting or exchanging of information or news. Again, that is bolded in blue for a reason. Okay, so let's think about that. Why would I do that? First of all, I want to talk about the exchanging of information. Okay. For anybody here, just think you don't have to share out or raise your hand or anything if you don't want to. You're more than welcome to raise your hand if you want to. But if you are a special education family member right now, if you are a caregiver, family member, and dealing with special education, how many times have you walked into an IEP meeting, they basically read the IEP to you and then said, okay, that's it, sign here, please, and did not ask for your input or appropriately give you opportunity to exchange information that you might hold about your child. Okay. So think on that for a moment, right? A lot of times what happens is caregivers walk into a meeting, they've blocked off only 30 minutes to go through a 30-page document. You sit down, the teacher reads it line by line and says, okay, we're at the part for parent concerns. Do you have any concerns right now? Well, you haven't even heard the entirety of the IEP. You're not necessarily understanding some of the assessments that are in there. So you're like, nope, I don't have any concerns at the moment. They read through the rest of the IEP and go, okay, everybody agree. Everybody signs that they agree. And that's it. And that's your IEP meeting. And you're expected to be a full and meaningful participant as a caregiver in this IEP meeting, but you haven't exchanged information. You haven't exchanged anything that you feel is important about your student. Okay. That's not communication. That is not A, inclusive, and B, an exchange. It is, therefore, you've got to break down in communication right off the bat. Even if nothing has actually gone wrong in your IEP meeting, it's still not appropriate communication. And it doesn't leave the door open for appropriate exchanging of communication and information. So think about that, right? When we have advocacy, right? When we're supporting that respectful communication, when we are thinking outside the box, right? We have that good advocacy skill. And we have inclusive communication. We have the practice of providing equal access for all caregivers. And we have the true exchanging of information. That's when you have appropriate special education advocacy. When you've got respectful communication, thinking outside the box with good solution, including those family members that could be marginalized or not understanding what is going on in the meeting, and you have true exchange of information, then you have a full and meaningful IEP team. That is how you have a full and meaningful IEP team, through inclusive communication. So when I talk about inclusive communication, and I'm talking about really what is being inclusive, what does that mean? What isn't inclusive communication? This is something I like to call the Bermuda Triangle of lost communication. Okay. First, let's think about parental disability. Okay. If you haven't read the recent statistics on the largest growing group of diagnosed developmental disability later in life, so ADHD and autism specifically, is between the ages of 26 and 44. That demographic, the the rate of diagnosis, I want to be very clear here. There's not more people with autism and ADHD. It's more people with appropriate diagnosis, right? 246%. It has gone up 246% in the last decade between the ages of 26 to 44. Now think about that. That demographic also has the largest number of young children between the ages of kindergarten and sixth grade. Okay. And the vast majority of those children are in public schools. And knowing what we know about the rates of students that are on an IEP, clearly we are going to meet a lot of students with developmental disabilities who also have parents who have their own disability. But that's not always taken into consideration, right? We consider and we focus very heavily on that student disability, which is appropriate when we're talking about educational goals. But how we convey and how we communicate those goals, those accommodations, and those expectations for the student to the caregiver, parental disability needs to be considered in that. Okay, so let's consider perhaps a caregiver that has autism themselves and their processing speed may not work the same as a neurotypical adult. And that caregiver needs extra time to read over the IEP prior to signing a legal document, right? We have to consider the fact that an IEP is an individual education plan. The document where that plan is documented is federal law. It is under IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Therefore, when you are signing your name to that individual education plan and dating it and state that you agree, you're signing a legally binding document under federal law. So therefore, it really goes to show that we have to consider, are we giving our parents with disability enough time to ensure that they have the access, knowledge, and ability to process the legal documents that we just gave them? So that's part one of the Bermuda Triangle of lost communication. The second part of it is educational attainment and socioeconomic status. We know, especially in our urban schools, such as Tulsa Public Schools, we have a high level of students that come from poverty backgrounds, that come from low socioeconomic backgrounds. Generally speaking, the correlation between low educational attainment and low socioeconomic status is correlated. Okay, there is a high level of correlation there. Therefore, we have to consider the fact that a parent that may have low educational attainment may not have access to the vocabulary and to the language that is in the individual education plan document, especially when we're doing things such as evaluations, right? So when we're coming up on eligibility, for example, and we're doing the MEGS, the multi-eligibility group summary, okay, that goes through perhaps an IQ test, perhaps speech and language testing, perhaps achievement testing in reading comprehension, math problem solving, math comprehension, word problems. All of these things. You have standard scores, T-scores, all of these different things. And how do you ensure that a parent that may not have the educational attainment to understand those scores is understanding them appropriately to be able to sign that document? Another consideration when we think about socioeconomic status, right, is that the scheduling of an IEP meeting. As a former special education teacher, I can tell you that there is an unconscious bias that exists within public schools. Even though teachers know and teachers are trained to know what the demographic of their school is, what the demographic of their district is, and what the demographic of public education in general is, the unfortunate unconscious bias exists that when a special education teacher calls home to schedule an IEP meeting, they are going to get a white middle class stay-at-home mom. It's unfortunate because then how we know that to be true is that many times a special education teacher will call a caregiver and say, "Hey, your child's IEP is due in 48 hours. Can you please be here tomorrow at 1 p.m.?" Well, tomorrow at 1 p.m. may be a Tuesday and that parent may be working. Or perhaps that parent or that caregiver is a night shift worker that works 12 hours and needs that time to be able to sleep. So, how are we really ensuring that mutually agreed upon time for the meetings to be held is taken into consideration with socioeconomic status? The third part of this is non-English preferred. Okay, non-English preferred families. And we have a high level of immigration into this state. And therefore, we have a high level of students with immigration status that are students with disabilities. And therefore, yes, the law states that all documentations and all meetings must be appropriately translated for those families. But are we ensuring that this translation is quality? Are we ensuring that the translator themselves has the access, knowledge, and background to understand the legal language to be able to appropriately translate it back to that caregiver? And then are we ensuring that there is true understanding in that parent's, in that caregiver's native language to be able to understand that they are signing a legal document in that language? Sometimes, many times, you might have all three. You might have all three of these pieces of the lost triangle of communication at one meeting. At one meeting. And so that really becomes important when we're looking at advocacy and inclusive communication, especially for these public school systems to be considering when they're working with these caregivers. So how does that work with advocacy? How do advocates work with that? And how does training occur for these caregivers? Then we think about how do we make that triangle green? Three things: access, knowledge, and exchange. Access, knowledge, and exchange. First of all, does this family have access to the knowledge about special education, transition, law, any parts of the IEP, any parts of the evaluation? Do they have access to the knowledge? Do they have the ability to access the internet at home? Do they have the ability to access a friend, family member, or advocacy agency that can help explain it to them? Do they have access to the verbiage? Okay. Do they have access to the meeting times? Do they have access to the school? Do they have transportation? Do they have access to the knowledge? Does this family or caregiver have the language to understand special education systems, transitions, meeting times, the legal documents, the evaluations? Do they have the language? And I don't mean just English. I don't mean just English. I also am talking about socioeconomic status and educational attainment, because that does affect how a caregiver will use language. Okay. Do they have that language to understand it? Only when there is appropriate access and appropriate knowledge can you then have appropriate exchange. Only then can a family or caregiver feel comfortable or able to exchange information that they might hold about their student that may be pertinent to this meeting. Because if they don't have the access and the knowledge, chances are you're going to get that caregiver that's going to sit, to look at the IEP, sign that they agree, and walk away. And when we talk about behavior as communication, right? We talk about that with children a lot. Behavior is communication, but behavior is also communication with adults. And a lot of times the easiest parents and the easiest caregivers that special education teachers think, oh, this this family, they come in and we might be here for 15 minutes. They look over the IEP, they never have any concerns, they sign their name, they click agree, and we are done. Are we certain that that family member hasn't just gone into freeze and fawn? Are we certain that that family member just isn't exhibiting behavior of non-understanding? And that doesn't necessarily mean that they're an easy family member. It may mean that they just don't have the understanding. They didn't have the access, or they didn't have the knowledge to truly be able to advocate for their student. They didn't have that ability to exchange that knowledge and communication. So what does that look like? What does special education access look like from a family perspective? These are the questions that we get. Where do we find the resources? Where do we go? Where do we go to find training on the verbiage? Where do we go to find the law? Where do we go to make sure that the school is doing what they're supposed to do? Where do we go when disputes arise or we feel we need to file a complaint? Meeting times. Are they actually mutual? Is the school giving options to the caregiver about when they can come to their meeting? Or are they just being told when to show up? Providers or other agencies, especially in transition, vocational rehab, outside therapies, are they attending the meetings? Are they allowed to attend meetings? And how do we know? Access to the paperwork. Is it being provided prior to the meeting? Are they given a chance more than 24 hours in advance to look over the paperwork to ensure that they have a full understanding of the goals and accommodations and services prior to agreeing to them? Are the options for services, goals, and accommodations being explained to them in their entirety, in their native language, and in a way that they can understand it? And lastly, are these families and caregivers being given full, complete, meaningful participation as an IEP team member under the law? Because all of these things, access, knowledge, exchange, resources, meeting time, all of those things are part and parcel to being a full and complete, meaningful participant on the IEP team. A lot of people think, oh, the IEP team is just majority rule. A parent can come in and they can disagree, but the school's going to do what they're going to do anyway. And that isn't true. That isn't true. The family member has the right to disagree, submit a comment form, and move that complaint up the chain to ensure that their concern is being appropriately held. Okay. On the flip side, families don't always get what they want. I'm going to use an example here. The number one call, the number one thing that we are asked when we say, okay, what do you feel that your student needs? Well, I believe that my student needs a one-on-one paraprofessional because I know they'll just do their work better and behave better if they have somebody sitting next to them all the time. Well, guess what? I've got adult ADHD and I absolutely would work better if somebody is sitting next to me all the time and making sure that I get my work done. Fortunately, that's not how that works. And unfortunately, that's not every student is going to qualify for a one-on-one paraprofessional to sit next to them and help them with their work. But you know what we can do is we can say, hey, your student doesn't necessarily qualify for that particular service. There isn't a need for that, but let's think about what they do need. I see that your student is really struggling with independent transitions. They are struggling to go from reading to math time without having some issues. What if we looked at what some extra adult support would look like? What if we looked at what transition mornings would look like? Okay. So it isn't always parent decision making, not always school decision making. There's got to be that exchange of information and that access to, hey, there's other options available to you. There are other things that you can do to get both your students' needs met and have appropriate services written that they qualify for. That is really what being a full and meaningful participant in the IEP meeting actually means. There we go. And then when we consider the language, right? Considering the language from a family perspective, okay? This is a lot of the kinds of questions that we get all the time. You don't have to share it out if you don't want to, but look at all these acronyms that I have up here. How many of you know exactly what each and every one of these acronyms are? Right? DRS, VR, IDEA, FAPE, FERPA, LRE, AT. As a former special education teacher myself, I know what each of those are, and it's easy for me to fall right back into speaking into that jargon. It's easy for me to just go, yeah, I want to ensure that that student is getting FAPE. Well, what is FAPE? Oh, I want to ensure that that student is getting a free and appropriate public education. That is FAPE. Your rights under FERPA is that you have the right to view the IEP and to have access to all of their educational records. Oh, FERPA, the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. We need to ensure that your student is being educated in their LRE. Oh, I'm sorry. We need to ensure that your student is being educated in the least restrictive environment. Okay, so it's really ensuring that school teams, advocates, and everyone are explaining the language of school in its entirety. Just like going to the hospital or going to a courthouse, okay? There is a language that is spoken in a hospital. There is a language that is spoken in a courtroom. And there is a language that is spoken in a school among educators that not everybody else is privy to if you don't have that background. And so, for a caregiver to really be a full and meaningful participant in their IEP team, they need to also have that language. If they don't have the access to the language of the school, then they're not actually being given the chance to be a full and meaningful participant. Interpretation is everything being interpreted or translated. And are we just thinking about what the quality of that interpretation and translation looks like for these families and caregivers? What about educational attainment? Again, if we have a parent or a family member that has a lower educational attainment, we need to ensure that they have access to the same language that is being used around the table by the educators. Also, interagency language use, especially for those students that have severe and profound needs that perhaps DDS is involved, perhaps DHS is involved, and other agencies that may be interacting. And are they using language that is also inclusive and accessible to that caregiver? So, our program at the ARC of Oklahoma, we do run a training program called the ARC at School. I do head this program up as the training and outreach coordinator. It is a two-part curriculum. There is an 8-module online curriculum over federal IDEA, okay, over what the federal law, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, is and looks like. And then what we do with our facilitated program is that we break down that language even further and apply it to what we do here in the state of Oklahoma, what that looks like for us here. I also refer a lot to the Oklahoma Special Education Handbook called the Oklahoma Policies and Procedures. And we take all of this and put it into plain language that all families can inclusively access. Through this, we are able to empower families and caregivers to access information, to have knowledge of the language, and truly exchange information about their student to the school districts and the school systems that they are currently working in. The goal really is to empower these families and these caregivers to be able to advocate appropriately for themselves. Okay, so that they feel as though they really are that full and meaningful participant in the special education system. We will be starting our facilitated programming back up in January. We offer it in both English and in Spanish, and we offer it both online and in person. Um, we generally do the facilitated portion. The 8 module online curriculum is self-paced. And then we offer the facilitated in-person or virtual options on 4 week in a 4 week series. Because we to go over 2 modules per evening is what we do. The ARCA school program is amazing at being able to take the law as it's written and make sure that families and caregivers have that true access and understanding to it. How we can help, that's the training aspect. That's the first prong, the training aspect for families and caregivers. But if you do need direct one-on-one services for advocacy, we do offer that as well. This is our contact information here for myself and Sherilyn Walton, the two of us that work in direct advocacy support as well. We are more than happy to even just to explain the process. We do get a lot of calls from caregivers that said they're going to do an evaluation. We have an evaluation meeting, and I don't know what the next steps are. Or I know that I need to request an evaluation, but I don't know how to do that. Can you help with that? Okay, so we are more than happy. We don't even have to attend meetings. We do attend IEP meetings, but we don't have to. We can also more than happy to sit down over coffee and explain paperwork too. So we do a lot of different services. We can make it look however caregivers need it to look. The goal really is to just empower those caregivers that they feel comfortable going into these schools and being able to navigate the systems themselves. So that is the end of my PowerPoint presentation. I'm going to stop sharing so that if there are any questions, I do see a couple things in the chat. So if you've got questions for me or comments, I am more than happy. I'm going to see if there's any. Nope. Okay. Thought maybe there would be questions. You do have a copy of my slides in the chat. Yes, Renee?
Um, I'm sorry. I was going to ask a question and then you called on me and my brain just kind of went
No way.
blank. I guess my first question, even though I know the answer, but how much does it cost for parents to be part of the ARC at School program?
It is free for caregivers. We want to make this as accessible as possible. So it is currently free for all caregivers to access our programming.
Okay. And then what happens after they attend the ARC at School program?
Yeah, so after attending our training programs, you then have access to the curriculum, all my slides, and ongoing support for as long as you really need it. We make sure that everybody feels supported in the curriculum. The online modules, you technically have access for like 6 months, but that can be extended for as long as caregivers need it to be extended for, as well as having unlimited access to the slides and things that I use in my particular trainings. Any other questions for me?
You spoke to advocacy. Can you give us a can you give us a scenario of positive advocacy versus advocacy gone wrong? Just a scenario or
Yeah,
two.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's lots of different scenarios of what positive advocacy can look like. And one of the ways that I'm going to talk about behavior specifically because that tends to be our number one. And I do get caregivers who call me and say, "Well, my child's in an IEP. They can't be suspended." And a lot of times it's educating that number one, yeah, your student can be suspended, but there are additional procedural safeguards that are in place to ensure is that suspension or that incident that happened with their behavior, is it related to their disability? And if it is, are we looking at an appropriate behavior intervention plan? Are we looking at a functional behavior assessment? And looking at what those other solutions are so that we're not walking into a meeting angry going, you can't suspend my child. You must bring them back right away. Well, no, well, let's look at what the law says. Let's look at what the procedural safeguards say, and let's look at have these other things been implemented prior to getting to here. And if they haven't, then let's go ahead and work on getting those things implemented.
You referenced procedural safeguards. Would you mind describing some of those for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So
Thank you.
procedural safeguards are the rights of parents and family members and caregivers in special education. One of the procedural safeguards that parents have is a right to access all of their students' educational records. They have the right to dispute resolution. They have the right to disagree with an IEP or an evaluation and to be able to utilize dispute resolution, such as the Special Education Resolution Center, for facilitation, mediation, state complaint, and due process. They have the procedural safeguard to do that. Procedural safeguard in mutual meeting time and location. Okay. So if a school is absolutely demanding that the caregivers show up in 24 hours and it absolutely doesn't work for their time, they have a right to say, under my parental procedural safeguards, this meeting time must be held at a mutual time. And this particular time does not work for me. Can you please give me three or four options that might work for you? Okay, to meet that mutual time. Another procedural safeguard for family members is the right to disagree and have dispute resolution. I already talked about that one. Thinking about all my procedural safeguards off the top of my head. Having it understood and translated. Translation is actually a procedural safeguard under the law as well.
Thank you. If a parent has requested like an evaluation for their child for an IEP, what does the time frame look like and how would a parent do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So if a caregiver goes ahead and requests evaluation, number one, I always tell the caregiver, put that request in writing. If you just go to your child's teacher and say, I think my kid needs to be evaluated for special ed, and you never follow up on that and you just stated it verbally, it never happened. Okay, because chances are that that educator forgot. Okay, or they didn't know who to get that message to. Always put your evaluation requests in writing, and make sure it goes to as many people that are involved with your student as possible. Whether that's the student's counselor, the teacher, the principal. If you happen to know the special education coordinator for that district, send it to them too. Make sure you get that evaluation request in writing to as many people as you're able to get it to. After that, that request, the law basically states that they have to respond within a reasonable time frame, okay, on whether or not they're going to evaluate, right? In order to determine whether or not they're going to evaluate, the school must do something called a review of existing data. So they need to look at all of the students' records. They need to do talk with the student's teacher, talk with the parent, and determine, is there data here that suggests that we should evaluate, and then make that decision. But that must be done in what they call a reasonable timeline under the law. Okay. And then after consent to evaluate is signed, so a parent or caregiver must give consent to evaluate. They must sign consent paperwork. Once that consent is signed, here in Oklahoma, they have 45 school days, okay, in order to finish that evaluation. 45 school days. So, fall break, winter breaks, things like that do not count against that 45 days, okay? So they have 45 school days to then evaluate.
What happens if a parent feels like their child should be on an IEP, but it wasn't, the evaluation showed that that wasn't negatively affecting their education? What might a parent do in that situation?
Then you
Sure.
would look at a potential 504 plan. Okay. So let's talk about 504 versus an IEP. Okay. Both of them are federal law, right? You've got IDEA for the IEP, right? But you've got the Rehabilitation Act or the ADA for a 504 plan. Okay. A 504 plan is when a student has a documented disability that they need to be accommodated for. The number one accommodation, a physical accommodation, such as ramps, lighting, things like that, right? That's what most people think of as a physical accommodation. Okay. They just need to have their disability accommodated for. So that could look like they might need preferential seating in the classroom closer to the source of instruction by near the teacher. Okay. They they may have severe anxiety that is not impacting their education in such a way they need in special ed instruction, but they need accommodations such as leaving class 5 minutes early so they're not in a crowded hall. Okay. Accommodation is under a 504 plan. An IEP, a student to be qualified for an IEP, they must show educational impact. It must adversely impact their education, meaning that without instruction, special instruction, they will not make educational progress in their area of weakness. Okay. So let's say that a student is really struggling with reading comprehension and vocabulary. That student has a weakness in reading and requires special instruction in reading in order to make educational progress in reading. Okay, that would be appropriate for an IEP. So the basic way to think about it, 504 accommodations, IEP specialized instruction. Does my child actually need special education instruction to do well in school or not? And if the answer is no, if the answer is, hey, they're accessing their curriculum, their grades are fine, they are understanding the material, they just need some accommodations, then a Section 504 plan is more appropriate.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions? Um, Erin, thank you so much. You are so knowledgeable. I always love to hear you talk, given that you're an educator. Um, I am going to put, let's see. Oops, sorry. I'm going to put in the chat our, we have a question from Jill.
It's okay.
No,
I just
yeah,
had
no,
more of a
ask,
comment.
go for it.
I just had more of a comment. Thank you so much. I'm still very, very new to education, and last year was my very first year, and I actually worked, I was assistant director for a transition 18 to 22-year-old program. And about 2 weeks ago, they said, we're gonna temporarily move you to the high school. And it has been such a challenge cleaning up a huge mess left by the last person. And I've had to find alternate ways to, meet with my parents, because the issue that I was running into is a lot of them are either working or they don't have the means of transportation. So I've been doing a lot of the IEP meetings over the phone, and I've even went to a couple of houses. They're like, you can come over, if you, sure. Um, and I'm really glad that you gave that resource, because one of the questions I was going to ask was, is there something that I can give and leave with my parents? Because so far the IEPs that I have done, the parents had no knowledge of, really, they just knew their child was on an IEP and that was it. They didn't know, ways to help them or any of the language or anything. So I'm kind of glad that I didn't even know that um, book, that binder, what it is existed. So I just wanted to say thank you, because I just learned so much.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I could give you a little tip, one of the things that would help, okay, is consider having a pre-IEP meeting with your parents, okay? Consider having even if you have to do it over Zoom or over the phone, right? Have a pre-IEP meeting. You don't have to go through the whole IEP, but just go through, hey, this is some of the conversations we're going to have. This is some of the things that we are thinking about. And make sure that the family member is getting a copy of the IEP, the draft IEP, and make sure you make it very clear that you're not making decisions, okay? That you're not making decisions on the IEP without their signature, that it is a draft IEP, but let them read over the draft IEP and ask you questions. What does this vocabulary mean? What does this vocabulary mean? Okay. And also encourage your families to create a binder. Okay. Having a binder system where they can put all of their evaluations, all of their past and present IEPs, all of their information in one place so that they have something to refer back to. They can refer back to old notes, they can refer back to old teacher notes so that helps them to build and scaffold some of that knowledge so that you're not having to reinvent the wheel each time you talk to that family. Okay, I
Okay,
hope that.
that's one thing that I have done is I've given them like a folder with their child's name on it, and I'm like, okay, after the meeting, after we upload everything, and I get them that copy, I put it all in that binder for them so they have it. It's just like it's like a 99-cent plastic one with the 3-hole prongs in the middle, and I, give that to them to hang on to because like I'm very organized like that. And if
Yeah,
I don't have it all in one place and labeled, I'm gonna have it everywhere. So
that's
that so
wonderful.
far has been it's only been 2 weeks, but so far I've gotten good reception to the ones I've done. So thank you again.
That's wonderful. That is wonderful. Thank you so much for doing that for our families. Thank you. Christy, are there questions that I can answer for you?
Hi, yeah, thank you. I just thought maybe I've been taking notes. So your session and your presentation has been extremely beneficial and informative. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Um, one of my questions has already been answered for the next Toolbox Tuesday. So is this the second Tuesday of each month? Like help me understand the pacing of Toolbox Tuesdays.
Oh, yes, it's the second Tuesday of every month at 6 o'clock Central Time on Zoom, and our topics are pretty diverse. We had a Paralympian come on one time. We had a teacher come on last month and talked about just ways of management at home and at school of childhood trauma.
Okay.
So it's, and I'm always open to topics.
Are you, is there a library that I could access from Pat? Like maybe, instead of asking one-on-one individual questions, like maybe if I had a chance to rewatch past
Yeah,
episodes, if
yeah,
you will, like maybe I
yeah,
could go ahead and just get them answered that way.
yeah. No, they're on the Oklahoma Family Network YouTube channel, and I'll drop that in the chat.
Thank you. And then for the Arc of Oklahoma okay, so if I was interested in having a private session conversation, when I could just utilize your contact information off of the slides and reach out
Yeah,
for
absolutely happy to do that.
preferably. Okay, thank you. Yeah,
Yeah,
from the phone. Okay, thank you.
you're welcome.
Oh, here we go. There we go. There's our YouTube. Um, and they're all recorded, and we have a wonderful staff who kindly edits them. So in case I forget to press stop. But no, thank you so much for being here, and it's always the second Tuesday of the month, and we'd love to see you. And thank you for all you do, Erin, for all of the families, caregivers, and whatnot in Oklahoma. It's much needed, and we greatly appreciate you.
you.
So with that in the chat, I put our YouTube channel, but I also put if you would like to register for the next Toolbox Tuesday, it's featuring Strong Dads. They're a program out of OSU that um, empowers fathers. And if you wouldn't mind filling out our survey, I will send that as well. I mean, it's there, but I'll send it in an email as well. But thank you guys so much. And if no one has any other questions, thoughts, or anything, I'll go enjoy your evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
you.